Welcome to the Divine Truth Followers interview series. I have pleasure to have a guest today, Graham. Thank you for being with me. I'm Pierre, by the way. So our question has been arranged in 3 parts, and we are probably going to do this interview in 2 parts, but it will depend a bit, obviously, of how long the answer will go. But basically, the first part of the interview will be just about the life of Graham before he discovered Divine Truth. The second part will be how he discovered Divine Truth and question about that. And the last part will be about his experimentation of the teachings. So Graham, can you just start by introducing your full name and also where you were born and in what date?
Graham Sutherland. I was born in Brisbane, spent the first 25 years of my life in Brisbane. Then I moved to Sydney for 10 years. Then went and lived in Italy for a couple of years, Germany for 6 months, and then when I came back I lived on the Sunshine Coast just north of Brisbane and used to go to Sydney periodically, and then eventually moved up here to Wilkesdale.
So you have been travelling quite a lot, Graham?
I've moved around a bit.
Yeah, a little bit. And what is your profession, Graham?
Well, I'm an electrical engineer. But at the age of 35, I felt that retirement was wasted on the elderly, so I just went to part-time work from the age of 35, which meant that I couldn't do much electrical engineering, and I'd pretty much about had enough of electrical engineering at that point anyway. So I got into things like Ayurvedic health treatments and just doing all sorts of part-time work. And then at one point I just tried doing a bit of taxi driving just as a bit of a fill-in, and I discovered I liked it. The pay's not very good, but I enjoy it, and the beauty of it is that it's very flexible. I can just choose when I want to work, how many hours I want to work, how many days I want to work, and what days I want to work. And if I want to take time off, I can just tell them that, I don't want to work this week, or I don't want to work on Friday next week or something like that, and it all fits in. And I only work 3 days a week or so it's pretty convenient.
That's what we are doing right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
Okay.
And I found it also very useful because I like studying people, and you get to study people a lot in the taxi.
Yeah, you get to meet a lot of people for a short period of time.
And because I'm in a small town, I get to know them. So they're all regular customers, so I get to know them. I've known a lot of them because I've been doing it for a few years now. I get to know them quite well, and I know where they live and who their friends are and who their relatives are, because they go and visit them periodically and stuff like that. And so it ends quite a friendly sort of relationship I have with my customers.
And that's certainly linked to the fact that you live in a small community, a small city.
Yeah, there's only 12,000 people in Kingaroy.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some question about your life since you were a little child, and try to go chronologically, to get to know you first, when you were a little child, to have an idea how was your family like, and if you had any siblings. And what was your family environment like when you were a little child?
If you had been a fly on the wall in my house, it would have looked like the perfect family, because both my parents tried very hard to fit into the roles that society assigns them. My mum was trying to be the perfect mum, and my dad was trying to be the perfect dad, and but in the process they were suppressing a lot of their emotions and stuff. So even though it looked like it was the perfect family, there was this undercurrent of emotion that contributed to damaging me, even though it wouldn't appear that that would be the case. Because I think when I was very young, I was very sensitive, such that I was picking up things from my parents that I could feel inside, but what I saw on the outside was quite different. That it all appeared beautiful. And so at some point I had this dichotomy of what I was feeling to what I was seeing, and I think when I was very young I made not a conscious choice, but a choice just the same, to choose to believe the external reality and to disbelieve my own feelings. And so I tended to suppress my own feelings and stuff, which is basically, I think, what both my parents had done. I think my dad was very suppressed emotionally like that as well. And so I was just following on, fitting into the family, because it was like I never saw my parents have an argument.
And so when you say this environment kind of damaged yourself, do you mean that like suppressing your feeling was damaging yourself? Is that what you mean?
Yes, well, you know, later on in life, when I was at high school, having to write essays and things, you know, the teacher would say, "What do you feel? Write down what you feel." And I'd go, "What do I feel? I don't know what I feel," you know. Yes. So I was completely out of touch with my own feeling, you know. These days I'd call it, I was fairly numb, really. And
so in which way it's damaging you? It's maybe not so obvious, because most of us are like that, no? So.
Well, when I was doing, at some point, well, at one point in my life, about 30 years ago, I did an experiment where I decided to do the maximum amount of what I like doing and the minimum amount of what I don't like doing. And that was really great for a few years. You know, I didn't even put in a tax return, and I went paragliding and all sorts of things. But then I realised that after a few years, I was no longer comfortable doing things that I used to feel comfortable doing. And so I realised that if you're not being challenged, you're not challenging your comfort zone shrinks. And so, you know, I realised that if I kept going the way I was going, that I could end up reaching a point where I was afraid to go out of the house. So I decided to take on a teaching degree. So I went to university for 3 years doing a teaching degree. And
so what age was it?
That was at about the age of 50.
Oh, okay. Oh.
And so in the course of that, they started talking about all sorts of things, that disabilities and things, and they started talking about Asperger's syndrome, which is on the autism spectrum, and I realised they were talking about me. And so I researched it and did an online test from Oxford University or something or other, and sure enough, I had autism, and that's why when I was young, why I couldn't tell if a girl liked me. And why I found it intensely uncomfortable to make eye contact with people. And so that explained a lot of things about my life, you know. And so when I was very young, I think at some point that's what brought me into it, was that shutting down emotionally. I think I was a very sensitive child.
Yes.
And what I was picking up emotionally from my parents, like, to give you an example, going out of chronological context, at one point I did the Transcendental Meditation and TM City program, which is, the TM City program is very powerful meditation techniques, where we ended up, the last part of it, we ended up doing 2 months in residence, doing like 8 one-hour meditation sessions a day. And people had all sorts of stuff coming up within them. People were often bursting into tears and getting angry and crying and screaming and yelling and stuff. And so it was bringing up all this stuff within them that in the TM movement they called release of stress. But in the Divine Truth organisation, you would call it release of emotion. So it was effectively a different name for the same thing, just treated a bit differently. It came up all by itself when you didn't encourage it, and in fact it was said that you didn't need to go through that, so it wasn't intended for people to encourage it, but it still came up all by itself without people having any conscious attention on it. So after I left that course...
So, sorry Graham, was it the same for you? You start to have all this, you start feeling your emotion at that?
Not to the same extent as a lot of people. I looked at what a lot of people were doing and thought they were encouraging it, you know, because they saw other people doing it and they thought that's what they're doing, even though the instruction was that you don't encourage it. Okay. So, but after I left that, I realised that I was having this empathy experience. Like I was feeling really blissed out. Like after 2 months of such intensive meditation, I felt like I was on cloud 9, you know. And I could look at people, and just in an instant, I could feel what it felt like to be them. Their emotional state, their emotional condition or whatever. And I could look from one person to another person to another person and just instantly feel what it felt like to be them. And because I was feeling so blissful, it was wonderful, this incredible experience, you know, and it lasted for like a month. So I could just walk down the street and feel what everybody was feeling inside about themselves. And after a while, I began to realise that everybody feels like crap inside. And a lot of people are completely unaware of it because they don't know any different. They've always felt like that. And so, you know, what you call happy or sad is just in comparison to what you felt like last week or a few years ago. You know, I feel happy now because I'm feeling better than what I did yesterday. But when I was looking at their emotions, I could see that they all were feeling really crappy. And then after about a month or so of experiencing this, the bliss from all the meditation started to wear off, and it started to become really uncomfortable. And I could feel how the crap that this person felt, and compare it with the crap that that person felt, and compare it with the crap that that person felt, and they all felt crappy in different ways. Some had fears and nervousness and all the different sort of things that people can have. So there's enormous variety there, but they all felt really crappy. Everybody felt crappy within themselves. And because it was like I was them when I was looking at them, it was impacting me. And it started to become intensely uncomfortable. I started to dislike this experience of feeling people's emotions. And once I started to dislike it, it started to go away. And then I realised that I must have been like that as a child, that I must have been that sensitive to people's emotions, and because I was picking up so much crap from people, that it was like putting my hand on a hot stove and going, you know, I didn't have to have a conscious thought about it, but just subconsciously I reacted against it and went to the other extreme where I just suppressed all of my emotional feelings and stuff, you know. And like this experience after this meditation stuff, it was also very confusing because sometimes I confused other people's emotions with myself, with my own. Like sometimes I didn't even look at people and I was feeling people's emotions. There was one particular experience when I felt really embarrassed and I'm there going, why do I feel so embarrassed? This is incredible. And then I looked over and I saw this fellow over there and I realised that there's something that he'd done previously that I was aware of, but something he'd done, and I looked at his face and his face was all red and I realised that's coming from him and I thought it was me, you know, and that was part of the discomfort that caused me to shut it all down. And I thought, I have this within me where I can feel that, but I've shut it down so much. And I thought at the time, this is after the meditation stuff, that I thought I'm going to have to develop a lot more strength within myself before I can let that start to happen, you know. So I can relate to AJ the way AJ seems to read people. because I've done it myself, you know. And when he talks about people and he can tell you all the things about people and stuff, I can really relate to it because I've been there, you know. But I don't have the ability within myself to be able to handle it, what I'm picking up from other people. And yeah, so it's a really good thing to be able to understand where AJ's coming from, the way he reads people.
And AJ is a man who claimed to be Jesus and who is teaching divine truths with Mary, for the people who don't know. But so, if I understand you, you did that, you start to just cut your emotions so you don't feel the discomfort of all the projection of others, but in the process you cut your own emotions. And so the problem is that what is damaging is that all the good things also, the good emotions are also suppressed.
What I've learned is you can't suppress the uncomfortable emotions, the bad, what we consider bad emotions. You can't suppress them without also suppressing the good ones.
Yes.
So you end up in this numbness. You can't suppress, like, if life is like this emotionally, you can't just cut out the bottom ones. You have to you end up cutting out the top ones as well, so you end up just like that. So my life emotionally was like this. Very stable. You know, I didn't go suffer the ups and downs that a lot of people suffered, you know, but it was just like that, you know, and from my perspective now, it's just incredibly boring to be like that.
At some point, it's not enough.
And it's depressing. It's depressing being like that because you miss out on all the joys and the sorrows. You know, it seems like the joys are so joyful because they're in contrast with the sorrows. And if you cut out the sorrows, you cut out the joys, and it's all just bland.
Which is the life of many people, even if they don't realize. Like wanting to control and having a comfortable life, you avoid some pain, but you avoid some feeling more joyous as well.
The thing about things like Asperger's syndrome is that everybody has some of the symptoms.
Yeah,
it's just that, and Asperger's syndrome is just a name that you give to particular things that people experience, you know. And when those particular things get above a certain level, then you might call it Asperger's. So in someone with Asperger's, they exhibit that to a greater extent than what more typical people might.
I can relate to that to some extent, certainly. I like to come back a bit in your childhood and know about, did you have siblings as well in your family?
My brother was 7 years older than me.
Okay.
And to me, I always looked up to him, but I was always a nuisance to him. I used to break his things and stuff like that, you know.
On purpose?
No.
No.
Because I'd be playing with them, and, you know, children often break toys and stuff, you know. And so he found me more of a nuisance than anything, even though I sort of idolised him.
Okay.
And so it's possible that some of my emotional damages come from my brother, not just from my parents.
Okay.
Because he did project at me a bit because of the way I might break his toys or something like that, you know.
So would he have been as well damaged like you by your family environment? Would have been also suppressed?
Yes, but in quite a different way. We have a lot in common, but he didn't get Asperger's.
Oh, okay.
And I think if you look at families, the first child tends to be different and follow the father or the mother more closely than what later children do. So, and he was treated differently too to me. And that was one of the reasons why he, I think, had emotional projections at me, was because I was treated differently to him. He'd sort of, for me, he'd broken the ice with my parents. My dad had been a lot stricter with him than he had been with me. Okay. So my brother had anger with me because I wasn't being treated as strictly as what he was. And but of course I was completely unaware of this because I'd shut down all my emotions at the time. It's only since that I've been talking with my brother, you know, in the last 10 years or so, that I've discovered all this stuff. I had no idea that he had this anger with me as a child because I was just shut down.
Okay. Okay. So what was your relationship with your parents, father and mother? What kind of, if you can remember as a little child?
My mother was rather emotionally smothering, and my dad was rather distant emotionally. He left me to do what I wanted to do. But my mother was, you could call it, it's been described of as emotional incest. Like there was never anything sexual about it, although there may have been sexual projections from her. Because one time I brought a girlfriend home and she got talking to my grandmother, who started telling her things about my parents' marriage that I'd never been told about. And that when my mother and my dad first got married, she had a lot of trouble with Dad, that he wouldn't open up to her. And, emotionally he was somewhat distant, And I think what happened was that she focused that on me. In the emotions she couldn't get from my dad, she tried to get from me.
Yes. And how does it feel?
And for me, it was like, I can remember as a child pushing her away. She'd be trying to hug me and I'd push her away.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling.
It's not, and she was like needy of love and trying to get it from me, and I would just push her away.
So, but you were quite free in your choice and what you want to do with your days as a child, which is a nice environment for that.
Like I said, if you're a fly on the wall, it would look like the perfect family.
Okay, and which kind of character are you? What did you like to do as a child?
I remember having a Meccano set, building stuff, and experimenting with stuff. And like the Meccano set was interesting because it had all these examples of things you could build, And I never built any of those things. I just put it all together and started experimenting with myself. So I never ended up with any of the great big constructions that in the instruction booklet you could end up with. But I had things that moved, and it had a little motor that you could put in it, and I made little things that ran around the floor and stuff like that, that were all very complicated and simple. That a child would build, but for me that was incredible learning experiences.
So you liked experimenting and inventing little things.
And like my dad never taught me much. He never taught me how to use a hammer or how to use a saw, but I just got into his tool, he had a workshop. I just used to get in there and experiment for myself and discover how to do it, and copped a bit of flack from him because I didn't clean up after myself like, as kids do, and but he allowed me to do it, he didn't stop me, and then when I got to high school, I just took it to the next level. I became a real inventor, I was making rockets. I had, I used to mix the ingredients together, and I used to use soda siphon cylinders, and use that as a rocket engine. And I used to pack it full of rocket fuel, it was sulfur and zinc dust I was using at the time, and so I used to make these rockets, I remember the first one, and I had some friends over, and we had it in the backyard, and lit the fuse, and we went and hid, and then it just sort of going like this, and then it sort of went, and there was a puff of smoke, and it was gone. We didn't see it go. I was expecting it to go, but it just went and was gone. We looked up there, I was right up there,
How far?
Well, eventually did some calculations, and it went to about 100 metres. And we went looking for it. We found it in the next street, about 3 houses down on their front patio, So after that, we decided to go down to the local football field, and on the weekends, and let them off in the local football field. And then I always wanted to make a rocket that would go like this, instead of just disappearing. So we started experimenting with other rocket fuels, and one of them I remember doing a test, of rocket thrust by holding the rocket engine in multi-grips like this, out like this, and lighting it and sort of going like this, and the damn thing exploded, and it was really dangerous, really dangerous. And I have some ear problems that might be partly due to that. That because my ears rang till the next day, and a piece of metal went through an aquarium and through a clay pot and buried itself in the ground, and I was just lucky that the metal wrapped around the multi-grips that I was holding, so the shrapnel went every other direction but but towards me, and after that we used to do it out in the backyard in a pile of bricks, build all these bricks around them to contain everything, and I didn't want it to explode,
So you were quite inventive and you were quite passionate about your experiments.
I was really into science.
You were really into science. And what kind of person you were in your relationship with other child or teenagers?
Pretty shy.
Pretty shy.
Didn't know how to relate to people socially.
Many friends, or?
I had a couple of close friends, and that was about it.
Okay.
And funnily enough, I didn't really get bullied at school, even though I was the sort of kid that could, because I was the second smallest kid in my class, and one kid used to call me Runt, but the thing was, because I was shut down emotionally, I didn't react to their bullying,
Yes.
and like bullies, they do what they do because of the reaction they get. But because I didn't react, they might have a bit of a go at bullying me, and I wouldn't react, and they would just go off and bully some other kid. So I didn't have much trouble with bullying.
And what about the girls? You were like...
I had a lot of trouble with girls because I wouldn't look them in the eyes because I felt so uncomfortable. And if it was a girl was on the other side of the room, I wouldn't make eye contact with them and smile at them. I couldn't do that, Instead, what I would do, it was almost like I would sneak up on them and appear with them and then try and talk to them, And to them, it was a bit of a shock for them because they hadn't made eye contact with me. And
so they thought you didn't like them much.
Well, I don't know. They thought I was a bit strange, I think.
Yes.
And but for me, I was a very sensitive fellow, and I can remember going up to a girl at a dance once and saying would she like to dance, and she just looked me up and down and went no, and to me that was incredible. Yes. Incredibly uncomfortable. Painful. Yeah.
So you grow up and then you finish high school, and then what next? What did you do next?
Well, interestingly, in my final year of high school, I started getting very interested in spiritual type stuff.
Oh, very young.
So I've been on a spiritual path since high school.
Oh.
In high school, I started experimenting with Ouija boards, seances, and talking to spirits.
So, how were you influenced by some other people, or it came
just because I was so experimenting and interested in everything that was going on, other than emotionally. That's part of the reason why I got so into science and maths and stuff like that, is because my emotional part of my life just wasn't there. So I got into all this other stuff. And so my parents had bought me an Encyclopedia Britannica, which was the most amazing thing. And I spent many weekends with multiple volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica open. You'd research one thing and then there's something I didn't understand, so then I'd have to look up that. And I'd have this book open, and then there'd be something in that I didn't understand, so then I'd have to open this book, and then I'd work my way back just to try and find out what the original thing was, And so in the process of all that exploration, I discovered Ouija boards and stuff like that and decided to experiment with it. And some of my friends You know, I got some of my friends interested, and we used to have little seances in the bathroom, you know, blacking out the window of the bathroom and have seances.
Can you share
bathroom.
have you some interesting experience at that
Well,
time?
funnily enough, one time my brother came in when we were having it, and he asked the question, who was my, what did he call it? My lotus. And I went, what's a lotus? What's my lotus? It must have been some... And I asked him many, many years later what he meant, and what he meant was who was my girlfriend. But I didn't understand what lotus meant, and I guess some spirit responded, and it came back and it spelt, or at least what we thought it spelt, was Karen Lovell, because we were looking for a name. Karen Lovell. And for many, many, many years after that, anytime I met a girl by the name of Karen, I'd ask what her surname was, and that sort of thing, you know. And I was always curious about that, you know. And then decades later, it came to me that, hey, maybe Karen Lovell is so similar to care and love all. And that just gave me goosebumps. You know, that the answer that had come was that, to a question that I didn't even know what the question was, the answer could have come back as care and love all, which was pretty amazing, really.
Yes, awesome. So you were into... So did you go directly into studying things after high school, or what?
Yeah, I went to university. That's when I did the engineering degree. I spent a year as an electrical apprentice as part of a cadetship.
Yes.
And but I did, you know, when I was at high school, I started to have a feeling that it'd be good to be able to get into lotus position, you know, where you do this. Yes. And so I started doing that in high school and stuff, and I was researching gurus and all this sort of thing. And when I was at university, I came across transcendental meditation, and I learned transcendental meditation. And then after I graduated, I did the TM City program, this really powerful stuff that I mentioned. And maybe if anybody is aware of it, that's the one where they were talking about levitation, which was really just bouncing around on mattresses and things. But it was a very powerful form of meditation that connected you to your body rather than disconnecting you like most forms of meditation does. This actually connected you to everything. So it's not like a lot of forms of meditation that the aim is for this nirvana, which is really just some sort of numbness, you know. It was very much about connecting.
Okay. So what did you do after you study? Can you a bit summarize your life and in the following years in terms of what's important to you?
I got a job as an engineer, and I went and lived with some other people doing the Transcendental Meditation City program.
Okay.
And we used to have a room under the house that was decked out with mattresses. And every morning, get up at 5:30 every morning, we'd go down there and we'd meditate for an hour and bounce around on the mattresses and things for an hour. Oh no, the bouncing around was only just at the end. And then every evening when we all came home from work, we'd do it again, you know. And that was pretty powerful stuff, you know. I'd walk out from our little meditation room under the house and walk out into the backyard, and it felt like I could see God in nature. I could look at all the trees and everything, and it was like I was looking at God, you know. But it was an impersonal God. It was a God that didn't relate to me. I was just looking at God's works and seeing God in them all, you know. And it wasn't till many years later, well, after that point, I ended up moving to Sydney and got a job as an engineer in Sydney. Worked in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney, which is a museum of science and technology, designing and building the electricals and electronics for their interactive exhibits, the exhibits that you do things with, and learn by doing. And that was like working at Disneyland because it was great fun, you know. At one point I built a Van de Graaff generator, one of those things with a big metal bulb on top that throws sparks this far, you know. I designed and built one of those, and I used to have a lot of fun, and it was during that period that I reached the peak of what an engineer could hope to achieve, you know. But so I'm continuing on from...
Yeah, well, what are after that? Obviously, you are not doing that anymore.
Well,
so
when I was in Sydney,
yeah.
I also got involved in Ayurveda, which was associated with TM, which is the ancient Indian science of health.
Okay.
So I learnt to do the Ayurvedic massages, and there was a clinic in Manly that I used to work occasionally on weekends, doing the massages and all the other treatments. There's a whole series of treatments involved, and we learnt them all. And but I was working as an engineer during the week, and maybe every second weekend I might work doing the Ayurvedic health treatments, and it was a very good thing because the engineering was sedentary and very much in my head, and because I was designing electronics and stuff, and then I could go and work in the Ayurvedic clinic doing massage, and that gave me an opportunity to open my feelings a bit. So I could feel what was going on during the massages and all the other treatments, and caring for people, and we were doing things like giving enemas and stuff as well, you know. And but I could come back from a weekend, working all weekend, back to my engineering job, feeling better than if I'd spent the weekend lying on the beach. It was like the change was better than holiday, you know.
So what did you like about giving massage and giving healing?
Well, it was my first real experience of starting to, aside from that emotional experience for a month after I did the TM City program, it was my first opportunities to start to open up to people a bit again, you know.
Okay.
And I was very aware of this previous experience I'd had, and I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to start to open up to people in a limited sort of a way, you know, and it started to develop my heart a bit, you know. Okay. And
so can I ask you, so you experimented a lot about searching in, I suppose we can say, a spiritual journey, and what were you looking for? Like when you were doing this seance with spirit or transcendental meditation, what were you looking for after, or massaging and things?
Good question. What I wasn't looking for was God. But I just had this inner feeling that there was something more. That there was something more to the world other than the physical, and I just wanted to find out what it was. Okay. And I had a passionate desire for that, and so I explored other gurus and things, and so I was very interested in other spiritual paths and things. But the interesting thing was, at one point, at one point I was living with a fellow who spent 6 years learning to be a priest, and he dropped out 6 months before he'd become ordained. And I'd been talking to him about my experiences of seeing God in nature and things, and he said, that's interesting. He said, that's an experience of impersonal God, he said, and then he started to explain to me some of his experiences of a personal God. And I couldn't really relate to it, but he was a really nice guy, and I liked him, and I could appreciate him, and I went, okay, so I've had these experiences of impersonal God, maybe it's possible to have experiences of a personal God. So I just sat there in the back of my head, you know. I didn't have any experiences in that area, had nothing that I could call as an experience of personal God. And then at one point I started to experience a bit of mild depression. And it went on for quite a while, and I tried all sorts of things like
Sorry, do you mean it was after you did all this experiment with transcendental meditation and
I was doing
later?
transcendental meditation. I ended up doing the TM City program for over 30 years.
And it was after that period that
No,
you
it was during that period.
During that period.
Yeah. I started to experience a bit of depression, and I tried all sorts of things, you know, the things I spoke to the TM teachers about it, and they told me a few things, and I tried that, and it didn't sort of really work. I did lots of yoga and would go for runs, and I took up surfing, and surfing was interesting because at first it was punishment, but then and at about the same time, a friend of mine was going to India, and I asked him to see if he could get me some Ayurvedic herbs that would be good for my... I didn't call it depression, I called it melancholia. It was pretty mild, but...
Yes.
That if he could get something for my melancholia. And he sort of went to India, but when he came back, he didn't come back to where I was, and I didn't get to talk to him again. But he sent a message through a mutual friend, and he said that he hadn't gone to an Ayurvedic doctor, but he had gone to a psychic and had told him about my stuff, because I'd spent some time explaining to him what I was experiencing and I was wanting help with. And he explained all this to this Indian psychic. And the psychic, all he said was, tell him to pray. And when this message eventually filtered back to me, I went, oh, pray. Oh, geez, you know, because I'd always been pretty anti-religion.
Your family was not religious?
They felt like I needed a bit of a grounding, so they sent me to Sunday school, which I hated, but it gave me a bit of an understanding of the Bible and what Christianity was about.
But you didn't believe?
Never did anything for me.
No God, no the Jesus, nothing
did
of that.
Anything for me. In fact, I felt like religion was a bit of a crock, really, you know.
Okay. And your parents too, they felt...
Well, you might call them agnostic. One of my uncles was very religious, which I wasn't aware of until I found out a lot later. And I think that's probably why my dad, you know, he wasn't anti-religion. He was just sort of, not really for me, you know.
Would you call yourself agnostic as well in your life?
Yeah, I would call myself agnostic rather than atheist.
Yes.
Because to me, atheist is a belief system. You believe that there is no God. The only logical thing was, for a scientific person, to me, was agnosticism. You know, if just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, you were like a truth seeker. You wanted to know what the truth about the reality.
Yeah.
Is that,
so I had this passionate desire to explore the things that science couldn't explore. So I was passionate about science, but also took it a lot further.
Yes. And so we come back to this person coming back and tell you, pray now, Graham, you need to pray.
Yeah, so I thought, well, I know what sort of prayer I don't want to do, and that's the religious sort of thing. You know, I don't want to do a religious sort of prayer because I know that doesn't work. So I'll do some experiments. So I thought, oh, what sort of prayers can I do? So I tried praying to Maharishi, who was the leader of the TM organisation, and I tried praying to some of the Indian gods, and I tried praying to...
So how did that go, you first? How did that go?
Well, I tried them all at the same sort of time, you know.
Okay.
No, I didn't just try one, see if it worked, and then try another.
Yes.
You know, one day I might try this, and one day I'd try that, and one day I'd try that, you know. And
what would you ask?
The first thing that I noticed was the praying to Maharishi. That was the first type of prayer that I dropped, because I got the feeling that he wanted something from me. And, you know, he wanted me to be a TM teacher and to spread the word. And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not praying to somebody or something that wants something from me. And I kept an open mind on them all, and it wasn't really an intellectual thing.
What was a prayer? What were you doing actually? Because
Well, sometimes I was using words, and sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes, you know, it was free-form prayer. It was just doing whatever I felt like at the time. Sometimes, God, please help me to feel better, sort of things. And then other times it was just a desire, you know.
like to feel better or help me about something? You were asking something? Or what was it?
I'll tell you about what the results of it.
Okay.
Eventually I came to find that there was only one of the sorts of prayer that I'd been doing that I wanted to keep doing. And that was one where I was praying to some sort of amorphous God that I couldn't imagine. So anytime I tried to imagine a God, it didn't work. So I had to leave out the imagination. I was praying to something out there that was bigger than myself out there, and with which I didn't know what it was. So I was just basically throwing the prayers out there. And it was also not so much of a word-based prayer. It was more of a feeling-based prayer, and it was the sort of prayer where rather than praying for specific things, I just let it open. I was more just praying for help. It's sort of like, hey God, you can see me in a way that I can't see myself. You're looking at me from outside, and you can see things about me that I can't see for myself. So help me in whatever way that you can see that I can be helped, rather than, hey God, fix this problem for me. It was like I was being open in terms of what I received back. And I found that after a few months, there wasn't anything great happening, but I just found after a few months my depression went away and I felt good again.
Is that not interesting? Like for a scientist like you, it must be a leap of faith to experiment about something you cannot even imagine.
Yeah, it was like when this guy came back and told me I should pray, it was the last thing I thought that I could try, you know. And like at that point, I felt like I'd tried everything. You know, I'd tried the exercise and the surfing and the yoga and doing all these things and getting caught up in all these sort of things. But it was always this underlying sort of thing there, you know. And so I thought, well, I've tried everything else. I'll give it a go. And so I just went into it really open-mindedly and just tried everything just to see what happened. So it was an open-minded experiment. And I ended up with a result that was quite good. And but as soon as I felt good again, I stopped.
Okay.
Because I got the result I wanted, you know. And then in the following years and decades, actually, I would, if any time I was feeling really down, I'd start to use that prayer again and I'd start to feel better. But I only used it when I felt down.
Were you still meditating during that period of times, like transcendental meditation?
Yeah, yes. I was meditating, having 2 one-hour sessions of meditation twice a day for over 30 years.
So, but it didn't, you had still some period of time when you were feeling like you call melancholia or sad. So you were still thinking for something. You were still...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I felt like TM never really got to the really core of my issues. And like, I'd always bitten my nails. And a lot of people just make an intellectual choice not to bite their nails. But to me, my biting my nails was a symptom of something deep inside. And so I chose not to bite my nail, not to try and stop.
Right.
I just thought, okay, if I ever deal with this shit that's inside me, I will spontaneously stop biting my nails. And so I just left them to see whether I might, You know, if at any stage I stopped biting my nails, I would know I really worked through some big stuff. Because I could feel, you know, the TM had got me in contact with myself enough so that I could feel that there was something within me that was causing me to bite my nails, and I could get to it, but I couldn't really. No, I could get to it and I could be aware of it, because TM is about following the thought process back to its creative origin, right back to a core. You know, so you start with a mantra and thought, and then you follow it back. They have this bubble diagram where you're going back through your thinking process right to the very causal level of yourself, you know. And the TM City program is about operating at that level where you throw in something at that causal level within yourself and it bubbles up into something which turns into a bit of a bounce off the ground sort of a thing, you know. Okay. So in many ways the TM had a lot in common with what AJ teaches, where the terminology is just different, you know. You've got the stress release, and Maharishi often said that the stresses need to come out in a similar way to what they went in, which is like our concept of emotional release, where the emotions come out in a similar way to what they went in. So you've got those sort of things, and then his talk about the causal level of nature fits in with AJ's talking about how the effect our soul has on us, that it's acting at a causal level within us ourselves, and that bubbles up within ourselves into what is our behaviours and motivations and all that sort of stuff. However, the TM, it didn't really, it gave me the ability to see it all the way back to it, but it didn't really change it, you know. And that's how I could still experience the periods of melancholia and things.
And that's how you wanted still to look for something, if there is something else.
Yeah, and I got an enormous amount of out of TM and the TM City program. And for the first 10 years, 20 years, it was incredible. In fact, it was through that I eventually came in contact with my guide. In '95, I first became aware of my spirit guide. And, you know, TM helped me in that process, and
so in a way, it was a journey that opened you to a next step. If you hadn't done all this experiment with TM, what would have been the next step?
Looking back on my life, it seems like everything I've done has been preparation for what I'm doing now. It's magical, really. You know, like even when I was doing TM and I looked back to my high school days and thinking, it'll be good to be able to sit in lotus position, you know. And here I ended up doing TM and sitting in lotus position periodically, you know. And I think, wow, you know, that just was preparing me for this. And, you know, I have this beautiful property here now, which is 40 acres, and which I'm doing the trying to create a loving ecosystem, which is a bit like a Garden of Eden type thing, that takes care of itself, but is still supportive of all life, you know. But previous to that, and before I met AJ, I was trying to do exactly the same thing on my little suburban block on the Sunshine Coast. And what I was doing then was just exactly the same thing as what I'm doing now on a smaller scale. And then before that, when I was living in Sydney, I was growing things in polystyrene boxes and doing things in ways of studying how the plants worked and things. And then if I go back even further, when I was doing a lot of skin diving and spearfishing and stuff, I used to catch marine aquarium fish. And I used to have this marine aquarium, and I tried to set up an ecosystem where I had another aquarium where I was growing sea monkeys, brine shrimp. And then I just had a little thing that sucked the brine shrimp out and blew them into the aquarium to feed the fish live food. So I was growing the live food here, and then just completely automatically they were finding their way into the main aquarium for the big fish to eat. So it was like setting up an ecosystem where these marine fish that I'd caught in the wild could eat a more natural environment rather than just trying to feed them on fish food or stuff like that.
So they were both connected.
They were both connected, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's like my whole life is just following this course, and it's fascinating to me because it means that time is not what we think it is. You know, that there must be something that goes backwards in time that can pull itself up by its own bootstraps. You know, it's like you reach down and grab your shoelaces and you can pull yourself up. So there must be something about me now that created what happened in the past, or me in the future that's pulling myself up to me, you know. And it's just magical to me to feel that, you know. And whether it's me that's all doing it or whether God's involved in the process, I don't know at this point. It's still a process of discovery.
Yes. So you reach quite a level of a teacher in the meditation and things like that. And
I never wanted to be a TM teacher.
But you were like, you had the expertise and the knowledge of
I had all the expertise and knowledge.
You were like experimenting to the almost the maximum you could reach. And so how would you consider yourself do you consider yourself to be a loving person and to be a loving being at that time, and to have sorted out your life and be an example?
I learned a lot about how the human brain has an incredible capacity for self-deception. Like not long after I did the TM cities, and I was making enormous progress, I felt like I got rid of my anger because I'd been aware how much anger I have. And I thought, yeah, I think I got rid of my anger. I think I'm through my anger, you know.
Yeah.
And then what happened was my law of attraction brought this girl into our household. She rented a room in the collective household we had. And at first we were attracted to each other, but then it turned into this incredible anger with each other, you know. We just got on each other's nerves. And I had never felt so much anger towards anybody in my life. You know, here I went from one point where I felt, I'm getting through my anger. I'm letting go of it, you know. And then my law of attraction brought me this girl that thrust in my face that, oh no, I've still got loads of anger, you know, and it's bigger than I'd ever imagined, you know. And that's another good thing about the TM organisation, the TM theology, is what AJ calls law of attraction, they call support of nature. That things come to you in order to help you in various ways, you know. And that's part of the reason why I gave up engineering and went to Italy, because I felt like I'm earning a good income here as an engineer, I've got them all set up, it's all comfortable, it's all wonderful, but I feel like I'm too in control of my life, that I need to put myself out there and just let God, well, at the time it was nature, we called it nature support, and because this was all while I was doing TM, and I felt I need to put myself in a situation where I need help from nature. And so I chucked in my job, went to Italy as just a backpacker at the age of 30, and started off by just travelling around, staying in hostels and pensioni and things like that, but always avoiding the tourists, but just hanging out with the Italians and making contacts and things. And eventually I made a few contacts with people where I could just work for room and board, and they might, for nothing, And then they might know somebody, like at one stage, one of the people I was working for, staying with, said, "Oh, my brother's building a house up in Bolzano. You could go up there and he'd probably pay you." So I went up there and spent some time up there working, helping build this house and experiencing Italian styles of building and all that sort of stuff. And then I ended up living in a meditation retreat in the mountains up above Lake Como near Milan. And I could stay there, just work on staff and go away, because I teed up a couple of bits of work in Verona and Rome doing Ayurvedic health treatments. And so I'd periodically go to Verona and Rome, and I'd get paid for those Ayurvedic health treatments. And then, so all of this was like throwing myself out there and just seeing what happens. And a really good example of it was when I'd been in Italy for about a year, my visa was running out, and I was going to have to leave Italy for at least a month before I could come back, and then I could do 6 months, and then it could be extended by another 6 months. And I'd rung around a few Ayurveda clinics in Europe and stuff, and nobody wanted anybody. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, I got to leave in 2 days' time. You know, and then I got a phone call from one of these clinics I'd contacted who said, yes, we could use somebody. When can you come? I said, tomorrow. And so like 2 days before I had to leave Italy, this job came. And so I went and it ended up being 6 months working in this Ayurveda clinic in the Black Forest in Germany. And but I ended up working there. I started off working doing the Ayurvedic health treatments, but then when he found out I was an electrical engineer, he got me working, building some stuff for him. So I ended up doing electrical engineering, working for him there, you know. And then came back to Italy and did another year in Italy. But by the time I came back from my 2.5 years living in Europe, all on a tourist visa, working illegally, even in Germany, I worked illegally on a tourist visa, but they were so scared they couldn't pay me. So I said, well, buy me an oscilloscope, which is a very expensive piece of electronic equipment. Buy me an oscilloscope, you know, just feed me and everything, and buy me an oscilloscope. So I ended up with this really nice $2,000 oscilloscope that I brought home with me. And so, you know, by the time I came back with as much money in my pocket as when I left. And I felt like anything life wanted to throw at me, I could handle. I felt like I know how to live life here now, you know. And so it had been a really good thing that I'd put myself out there, chucked in my really stable, well-paid, secure job, and just put myself out there into the world and just see what happens, and allow myself to be supported by, at the time I called nature.
Yes.
These days we would call it God. So
we can say that your experiment has built your faith in nature being supportive of you.
Yes, that's right.
Very positive experience. Yeah. And so you could relax in your life about trusting that all will be good.
And like that, these days, it's helped me develop my trust in my law of attraction. Anything that happens these days, anything that happens in my life, even if it's something that seems bad, I can see as an opportunity to grow in some way or other. It's all good. Whatever happens, it's all good. And so I can trust that I can just go and do anything that I like, and it doesn't matter what happens. You know, even if I end up in the shit some way or other, you know, there'll be an opportunity hidden within that for me to make progress.
Okay. Yes. What about family? You know, did you ever wanted to create a family, have children, and all these things? Or have you had a family?
When I was living in Sydney, I had this girlfriend for a couple of years where it got pretty serious. and she was a lovely girl. She actually had schizophrenia, which these days we would see as being very, very mediumistic, talking to spirits and affected by spirits and stuff. And she was concerned about having children, and that her biological clock was ticking. And so we considered the possibility of getting married and having kids and stuff, and I just looked at myself and I went, no, I don't want to do that. If I do that, I would have to compromise what I'm wanting to do. I'd be compromising myself. So I loved her a lot, and I loved her enough to be able to say to her, well, I don't want to get married and have children, and I can see that you do, so it's probably better if we split up and you go and find a man that will want to have children with you. And she did. And a couple of years later, she got married and had a young child. And I looked her up and actually went to visit her. She was living in Armidale, and went to visit her and her husband, you know, and went to there and smoked a joint with him. And when I left, I just said, Pauline's a lovely girl. Take good care of her, you know, because I could still feel a lot of love for her, you know.
But you didn't regret,
no, I didn't
like
have
to
any
be
regrets. No,
there.
I just told him to take good care of her, and I haven't seen him since.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you, Graham. I think we have a good idea of a bit of your life and your character and your passions.